Authoritarianism is better than democracy. Change my mind. Are you convinced that authoritarianism is the enemy and democracy is the hero that saves the day? Ha, really? If you really believe this, then listen up. Because I'm going to change your mind. Right, very quickly, and for the sake of you absolute gazebos out there that have no idea what authoritarianism is. Basically, it is a political ideal that can be described as almost the complete opposite of democracy. An authoritarian regime is characterized by strong centralized power held by a single person or a small group of elites. They enact policies without the consent of the people, where individual rights are subordinate to the state's demands and needs. So, it's basically one geezer in charge of a whole country who is free to do whatever with whatever he pleases. And yes, it is always a bloke. Well, up to now it always has been. Whilst, of course, in a democracy, citizens supposedly have the authority to decide legislation and elect their representatives through free and fair elections. So, on the face of it, doesn't it sound like rainbows and puppy dogs? Well, yes, on paper it does. But in reality, how many countries actually experience proper democracy? Have a think about it. How many democracies that exist today have what is known as the two-party system, where essentially there are two main parties that often swap power between each other, depending on the political landscape at the time of an election. Whilst these countries do allow for almost anyone to run as a candidate in the elections, the vast majority of people vote for one of two of the main parties. And what actually happens much of the time is, people just vote for the party they hate the least. Or they just don't bother voting at all because they feel nothing will ever change, whoever wins. Understandable, am I right? So then, why is authoritarianism better than democracy? Let's break it down, shall we? Let's start with the advantages of authoritarianism. Okay, first, efficiency. Authoritarian regimes can make decisions swiftly and act upon them immediately, without the boring, slow, bureaucratic processes that democracies face. In an authoritarian system, if a problem is identified as worthy of resolving, a solution can be conjured up pretty much overnight. However, in a democracy, solutions to those same problems can take years to even get started. And by that time, another election is round the corner, and everything is paused or even cancelled. Taxpayers living in a democratic system waste so much bloody money paying politicians to stand in the same room moaning at each other, picking fights and bickering, always trying to undermine one another. Like children arguing over whose turn it is to use the red pencil. It's pathetic. Am I right? Right then. Next one. Stability. Authoritarian governments prioritise stability and order, which can be appealing during times of crisis, but can be extremely beneficial to the progress of the country over a long time period. Again, in a democracy, you might see power changing hands over and over. You might see government officials and ministers being reshuffled, all with their own ideas of what is best for each department, ultimately leading to very little progress being made at all. And you know what else? A democratic government might end up implementing policies or making huge political decisions that they don't even agree on because they allow the public to vote on it. And get this, if the leadership of the political party in power changes, then a new prime minister or equivalent is elected without consulting the public. So, I think what I'm trying to say here is, it's effing dumb. Next one then. Economic development. Many argue that authoritarian regimes can drive economic growth without the constraints of democratic debates. We have clearly seen this with China, but many other authoritarian countries have seen incredible economic growth in recent times. Yeah, sure, democratic countries are often quite rich, but this is almost certainly not to do with them just being democratic. There are bloody loads of factors that come into play there. I've already done another video on why poor countries are poor and rich countries are rich. So check that one out when you get a chance. But essentially, democratic countries like to preach about democracy being a solution to poor countries' problems. But it ain't. There has been no times ever where introducing democracy to a non-democratic country has helped them in any way, shape or form. So democracies, shut up. Right then, let's move on. Control. Authoritarians maintain tight control over dissent, potentially preventing chaos or fragmentation in society. Now, if you live in a democracy, you might be thinking,
but it's our human right to free speech and protest and stuff.
Oh, be quiet, will you? So what? What percentage of protests actually lead to genuine reform in a democracy? The stuff one group of people want to protest against is just as likely to have the same amount of people that would be on the other side of the fence. Look, you can't please everyone. So, why bother watering everything down just to try to find a common ground with everyone? What's the point? You end up with meaningless and soulless policies that mean nothing to anyone. Forget it. Now, I know what you're thinking.
But Wikil Wabbit, geezer, I know you're great and stuff, and I've just subscribed to your channel and everything. But what about all the bad stuff people say about authoritarian regimes?
Stop your whining. I'm covering all that stuff now. The first one being lack of accountability. Authoritarian leaders are not accountable to the people, often leading to potential abuses of power and terrible corruption. But hang on a minute. Are you telling me that abuses of power and corruption never happen in democracies? Grow up. The so-called democratic politicians are always abusing their position of power for personal gains. And so many of these scumbags are corrupt, they just try to hide it more so they can get away with it for longer. So, the lack of accountability in a one-party system that people whinge about all the time is applicable to democracies too. So, let's scratch that out. Rubbish. And what about suppression of rights? Individual freedoms, such as freedom of speech and assembly, are often restricted in authoritarian governments. But, hang on a minute, are you saying this never happens in democratic governments? Give me a break, will ya? Yeah, sure. You can slag off your government for not pandering to your pathetic wants and needs, but they don't give a shit. And plus, you, the people, are supposed to have voted for those politicians to be in power and to make decisions on your behalf. Look into it yourself. How many protesters are arrested in democratic governments? How many people are removed from events and rallies? If the people running those events don't like what you're saying, your free speech is an illusion. Okay then, next disadvantage. Inequality. Authoritarian systems are said to exacerbate social and economic disparities. Now, this one is also a joke. I'm gonna give you a chance now to think about this one by yourself, just for a second. Are there any democratic countries that are free from inequality? Now stop thinking. You're doing my head in. I can hear the rusty clogs in your head struggling to spin. The answer you were looking for is no. There is so much inequality in democratic countries all over the world, whether that be the astronomical divide between the rich and the poor, or whether that be racial or gender or any other one you can think of. So, no. Inequality is everywhere, regardless of political regime. So, let's scratch that one off too. And the last disadvantage I'm gonna shove down your ear holes is long-term risks. The lack of checks and balances in authoritarian regimes can lead to long-term instability and potential upheaval. Hang on a minute. Weren't we just talking about how authoritarian governments are more likely to be stable? Yeah, we were. You're a sharp one, ain't you? This is absolute rubbish, as there are so many democratic countries that have experienced highly unstable political landscapes. So, democracy is not a guarantee for political stability or to safeguard against long-term risks. Now, don't get me wrong. There are so many bloody horrible authoritarian regimes, but this is almost completely down to who is in power and has not a lot to do with the system itself. Think about it. If an authoritarian system had the right person or small group of people in charge that genuinely had the interest of the people at heart and who were actually nice people, how much more productive and amazing would that be to live in? Free of the slow-moving bureaucratic decision-making that chops and changes every time a new party is voted in. Sounds like bliss if you ask me. But wait, haven't we just solved it? Because if the right party is voted into power in a democratic country, then surely that would be better, right? Oh, I see. Maybe I was wrong then. I've been known to be wrong. There was this one time in 1984 that I accidentally bought a Diet Coke instead of a full-fat Coke for my mate's great aunt at one of the neighbours' barbecues. Anyway, where were we? Ah, yes, the hierarchy of needs. Of course. So then, back to the question at hand then. So, it will come to no surprise to you at all that political systems are not universal. Let me say that again in basic terms, so you all understand what I'm saying here. The best way to govern a country will be based on the current situation of that country, in terms of economic status, religion, culture, geographical location, geopolitical status, and so many others. The concept of a hierarchy of needs, as proposed by psychologist Abraham Maslow, can be applied to the political realm to understand the motivations and behaviours of individuals and societies. In the context of political regimes, the hierarchy of needs can be adapted into a hierarchy of political needs. This hierarchy presents how needs for physiological survival, safety, belonging, recognition, and democratic participation shape political motivations and state responses. At the base of the hierarchy are physiological or survival needs, which correspond to the basic needs for food, water, and shelter. In a political context, these needs can be taken literally or translated into the demand for a stable economy, job security, and social welfare programs. So, basically, people won't give a toss about anything else if they're hungry and homeless. Makes sense, right? The next level up then is the need for safety, which in a political context translates into the desire for law and order, national security, and a stable political environment. But it can also be taken literally. Yeah, sure, you might have food on your table and a roof over your head, but if you don't feel safe in your own home, then what's the point? So again, you ain't gonna be contemplating over whether your vote in the election really matters until these needs are satisfied. The third level up is the need for love, affection, and belonging. Politically, this translates into the desire for societal harmony, cultural identity, and a sense of community. The fourth level is the need for esteem, which in a political context can be seen in the desire for recognition, status, and respect from others. At the top of the hierarchy is the need for self-actualization, which in a political context can be seen in the desire for democratic participation, freedom of speech, and the ability to influence political decisions. Alright then, blah blah blah. Let's break this down into simple terms. Basically, If you're struggling to eat and are homeless, the only thing you're going to worry about is food and shelter. Once you got that under your belt, the next thing you'll worry about is stability and safety for both you and your loved one. Only then will you start to worry about other things like education or health, and so on. So you see, authoritarian regimes can be good for certain countries that are poor, as they are better equipped at addressing economic growth in a country, and therefore, people will start to enjoy the basic necessities of life, like food and beer. And on the flip side, democratic countries need to stop shoving democracy down other countries' throats like it's a silver bullet to save everyone's problems. This is bollocks. All the problems with all the political regimes out there boil down to one thing, and one thing only: the human. All humans are susceptible to succumbing to greed and corruption and abusing any power they are given. So then what's the answer? I'm gonna make a huge leap into the abyss here and set myself up for a future video, so get yourself subscribed to be a part of this. Listen up. Why don't we take the human out of the equation? Let's have a highly advanced AI model to rule us all instead. Let us allow AI to make decisions for us and to implement policies that will help each and every one of us advance up the hierarchy of needs. Let's get rid of the scoundrels that rule over us now and pick a new leader to follow. The machine.